video I'm really excited about because this one's actually a two-parter. So we've got our friend Kaitlyn here from the Kaitlyn Amanda channel. She is an American who moved over just over a year ago to be with her husband. Hey Kaitlyn.
Hey Maz, thanks so much for having me on the BAM Famalam. I am so excited to get into today's video topic. You want to tell everybody what it is we're going to be talking about today?
Today, we're going to be doing an American and Brit reaction video to the culture shocks that we've faced in Australia moving over here. Take it away with number one.
The first one on this list is the clothing cost over here in Australia. I was blown away the first time I went shopping for clothes over here at just how expensive clothing can be in some of the shops. I went shopping and thought I could be able to buy a little sundress for maybe like $20, $25 at a Kmart or a Big W over here. And I was blown away to find that some of these dresses cost about $60 sometimes. Maz, do you remember seeing any sort of really big clothing price tag sticker shocks when you came over?
Absolutely. The UK high street is full of affordable fashion, really good stuff, good quality, good trendy stuff. When we came here, you know, you've got Kmart and you've got places like that, but there's not really much more on that kind of price level. It was a massive culture shock for us. You know, you go and buy a school uniform or a pair of school shoes and you're looking at least 50 bucks for a pair of shoes as opposed to say 10 bucks. It's massive. Sorry, I'm using school clothes references. We would be used to getting things a lot cheaper and having a lot more choice as well. But do you know what I do like here, Kaitlyn, is I love that many of the stores here are unique and they're actually owner operated by locals, and that's something that is very different for us. So with that, I'm kind of like, okay, well, you don't mind paying that extra price tag because it is all owned by locals, and that's a real positive here.
It really is, Maz. I love that there are so many little boutiques that you can go to as well. There's so many shops that have their own little independent feeling and their own vibe to them, and that you don't just have to go to the big brand name stores or the big generic department stores like a Kmart or a Woolies. You can find so many amazing styles of clothes if you just go to like the Salvos over here, or Salvation Army. Sorry, using some Aussie slang in this already.
Oh, do you know what? When you're talking Aussie slang, even op shops, we didn't know what they were. We would have called them charity shops. And so when people started talking about op shops, I had no idea what they were talking about. Number two, Kaitlyn, is the no shoes thing. I don't know what it's like down in Sydney, but so often here in Queensland, you just see people walking around with no shoes. That just seems to be the norm. Is that the same where you are?
You don't see it so much in the shopping centers. You'll see it if you're doing that little run to 7-Eleven, or I've seen people go into Macca's with no shoes. And for me, that was such a big shock coming over here. Because where I grew up in the States, we had stores that literally had signs in the front that said no shoes, no shirt, no service. So seeing Aussies walking around completely barefoot in and out of even some restaurants, I guess Macca's is technically a restaurant, was such a shock coming over here.
And shirtless, like you were saying. It's not just the no shoes thing, is it?
No, it's not. You definitely get used to seeing quite a few people without shirts, or maybe just like a very thin singlet, especially when it reaches those 40-degree days here. It gets brutally hot.
And that, yeah, that's definitely understandable because like you say, it is so hot that sometimes, I mean, I don't walk around topless, but I can understand men doing it. It is, yeah, I do get that. It's funny though, because Ben went back to England for a while, a few years back, and he's kind of, you know, become accustomed to occasionally not wearing shoes. He went to step outside of his mum's house and he was like, no way, it's gross. I think the fact that everything's that little bit more cleaner, there doesn't seem to be so much litter here as we've seen in the UK. And so I guess it's not so grotty if you do step outside without shoes on.
Over in the States, it's kind of hit and miss. It depends on the area that you grew up. The neighborhood that I grew up was like a pretty gritty neighborhood, so once in a while you could definitely see some broken glass on the sidewalk, so it was very common to at least wear flip-flops or thongs over here when you're walking around. Nobody would ever walk around barefoot, more so because you were worried that you would accidentally step on something. Whereas here in Western Sydney, where I'm at, things are pretty well taken care of. People really do take care of their lawns. They take care of the footpath over here. So it's pretty common to see people walking around barefoot, even if it's for something small, just to get the mail outside or doing a little 7-Eleven run.
Do you know, it's funny, I used to wear flip-flops or thongs when I was back in the UK. I wore them pretty much all year round, bar a couple of months over the winter. But when I did, every single day, my feet were jet black with dirt walking around there, and I've never had that here. So it's definitely a lot cleaner and a lot more well cared for, I think. You really see the Aussies take a pride in looking after things and just keeping them clean.
So one shock I was not expecting when I moved over here was to see houses that either have no dryer and just a clothesline out back, or see houses that have both, but most people still use a clothesline here. It's so common, especially in the summer when you have these bright sunny days, to hang your clothes up on the clothesline in the backyard, or sometimes in the front yard. I've even seen it. Typically in the winters when Aussies will sort of swap if they have a dryer and start drying things inside, but it's so common to see people with clothes hanging up on the clothesline. And for me in the States, that was never a thing that I saw. That was something that was so old school and something you thought people did in like the 50s and 60s. It's so warm in Australia that the clothes dry so quickly, and you get that little bit of fresh air smell to your clothes as well. I absolutely love it, and it's a free and honestly pretty economic way to dry your clothes over here. I absolutely love it. But Maz, did you guys have anything like clotheslines over in the UK before you came over here?
Yeah, I think the UK is pretty similar to Australia in that way. I didn't even realise that elsewhere they wouldn't do that. We would typically hang our clothes outside in the UK as well, unless it was a rubbish day, which happened quite a lot. And if it was a rubbish day, the Brits commonly use airers in their homes, so they wouldn't even necessarily put it in a tumble dryer because of bad weather. It would just be hung in airers around the house. When Ben and I first moved to Queensland from England, I really refused to buy a dryer because I thought I live in like one of the hottest places in the world. There's so much sunshine. I am not paying for a dryer. But about 5 years in, I got one and I love it because it just makes all the towels soft.
And it's definitely one of the best parts to having a dryer. So that's a word I haven't heard over here in Australia and isn't a word over in the States. What's an airer?
They're kind of, I guess, metal stands that you hang your clothes on. So kind of like a outdoor washing line, but it's indoors. I've still got those now because if I do washing at night, I still might not want to put it in the tumble dryer, but I want to hang it out to dry, so I'll just hang it on an airer. There's some things that I wouldn't put in a tumble dryer, so that's when I would use that. So I might not want to put t-shirts or jeans in because I get worried that they'll shrink.
And maybe some things you don't want to hang out on a clothing line and let the neighbors see. I can imagine trying to keep some of your delicates inside rather than airing them for the whole neighborhood to see.
My nearest neighbours are like half a kilometre away, so that really isn't a problem. Even in the UK, I didn't worry about hanging my knickers on the line. I mean, you have fences, don't you? And they're clean, they're clean. One of the things that shocked us, we didn't realise that pub culture is such a strong thing in the UK. We thought this was a strong thing worldwide. We were used to having pubs on pretty much every corner that you can go to. They are everywhere, and they're usually cosy little old buildings, and there's a real character to them. There just doesn't seem to be the same thing. People seem to drink differently here. We've noticed that people drink water in between having their alcoholic drinks, so that they seem a bit more sensible here, in all fairness. They're not binge drinking to get drunk, as is the British culture. How is that in the US, Kaitlyn?
In the US, I feel like it's more so an age thing than it is an overall culture thing, because in the US, our drinking age is actually 21. So people have to wait that extra 3 years before they're actually able to go out and legally drink. So probably from like the time they're 21 to like maybe mid-20s, 25, 26, that's when they start to go out and do the whole binge drinking thing. But then once they hit their late 20s, it starts to tail off a little bit and people become a little bit more mature about it. You don't have the late night staying out till 3 a.m. bingers anymore that you might have had for your 21st birthday. Whereas over here in Australia, just like in the UK, the drinking age is actually 18. And because of that, you see a lot of maybe the younger people, that like 18 to 21-year-old crowd doing the binge drinking. And after that, things tailor off over here. I feel like most adults over here are a lot more responsible when it comes to drinking. Like you said, they do oftentimes drink a glass of water in between their drinks. So people are a lot more mature about it. They don't drink to get drunk. They drink for the social aspect over here in Australia. Like pubs even have their own social clubs over here. I've seen meat raffles done at pubs. I've seen pubs put together outings for their regulars. So there really is a sense of culture and to some degree a little bit of community in a lot of the pubs over here, which is something that was so surprising and something I didn't expect at all.
Talking of things that they do for their patrons, actually, is really interesting, because a lot of the pubs here, and I mean, this is more the hotels, and I'm talking about hotels that don't have accommodation. We'll explain that another time. That's a whole nother thing. A lot of these places have the courtesy buses to take people home, which I think is amazing. That's a service that we wouldn't have seen elsewhere. So you're pretty much getting a free ride home from the pub, so that you get home safely and you don't have to pay a fortune on a Friday or Saturday night.
Another huge culture, like quite literally culture shock over here, is tradie culture over here. I had no idea that tradies were so overall well respected over here in Australia. Over in the States, if you're a tradie, a tradesperson, whether it's a plumber, an electrician, a contractor, a cement worker, anybody who works with their hands, you're almost seen as a failure. Even though so many tradies in the States actually make more money than a lot of college graduates, there's still this overall concept of if you had to go into a trade, then you kind of failed. There's this assumption that maybe somebody had either flunked out of high school or couldn't get into college or just overall isn't very intelligent, and that is so not the case in general. But here in Australia, tradies are actually pretty well respected and also very well paid. Here there's this respect for people who work with their hands, and I think that comes down a little bit to the tall poppy syndrome over here in Australia. The idea that whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a plumber or a sparky, no matter what, you're still contributing to Australia and Australia's community. Yes, you can be a doctor and you can be saving lives, but at the end of the day, it was tradies that put that hospital building together for you. So there's this sense of community, and as long as everybody is contributing, there's this pretty equal level of respect here in Australia that I didn't see over in the States. So Maz, what was it like for tradies over in the UK, and was it a big shock coming over here and seeing just how well respected tradies are?
I've got to say, I'm really surprised at what you just told us. I would have had no idea that in America that was like that. I personally would say that being a tradie is a really good job. You're skilled up. Like, I don't see why that would be a bad thing. And like you say though, people don't care what people do here. People are treated equally here, and freaking rightly so. There's no difference in, you being human, whether you're a cleaner or whether you're a CEO. I think most people in the UK think like that as well. If they don't, then there's something wrong with them. People are people as far as I'm concerned. I think in the UK, people are very polite generally. I mean, there's some riffraff, but generally people are polite, and so if they had those kind of opinions and they voiced them publicly, that wouldn't go down well. People are expected to treat people on a human level as opposed to a who you are or what you are. No one cares about those things, and if they do, they better keep stum. Whereas here, I think people just don't care.
So that's so refreshing to hear, because obviously coming from America, it's a very status-driven country. So the higher up the corporate ladder you get, the more successful you are, the more respect you get as well. So it was so refreshing coming over here and seeing that people are treated respectfully no matter what their job is, no matter what their profession is, no matter what their education level is. People with PhDs and doctorate degrees over here are treated the same as people who left school at year 10 and went to go get a job.
That kind of thing really shocks me. I judge people based on their behaviour for sure. If someone behaves badly or treats other people badly, I will judge them. But it wouldn't occur to me to judge someone based on income or based on career choice or whatever. Now you've seen the Australian way of doing that. How does that make you feel about the American way?
In a way, it kind of frustrates me a little bit because I know so many people in my family who either dropped out of high school or left right after high school and then went to go get trades jobs. And to hear other people talk about how they were failures, how they weren't really able to succeed in life, it's so frustrating because I see people with those exact same jobs and that exact same level of education just treated so much more respectfully over here. I know quite a few truck drivers over in the States, and they're seen as people who really weren't able to make it to get by. Whereas over here in Australia, my husband's a truck driver and he's pretty well respected for what he does. Australians really do appreciate not even just the underdog, so to speak, but the person who really does contribute, who gives back to the community. I feel like that's such a big part of Australian culture, and I wish Americans would start to see people in that same light.
You know, it's funny, I had a friend from back when I was 18 and she was a Turkish girl. She lived in the UK. She met this American man. She moved over to Seattle with him. And what she found really odd was that he wanted to buy things that they couldn't afford so that other people would see that they had these things. So he would want to get them into debt to have a nicer telly so that when he invited people over, you know, he had the best telly or whatever. And, you know, my friend, she thought that was very strange and she refused, and she lived how she always had done, which was, you know, within her means. But she said, you know, that doesn't seem to be socially acceptable here. And I don't know if that's just a Seattle thing, but, you know, again, it was something that seemed odd to her as a girl who'd lived in England for a long time.
Funny enough that you bring up TVs and that, there's actually a pretty big business right around the time of the Super Bowl, which is like the largest sporting event over in the States. A couple weeks before that, people will start renting out massive TVs and pretending that they own them from companies. So people will rent out 100-inch screens and invite everybody over for a Super Bowl party under this preconceived notion that the person actually owns that 100-inch TV. So it's actually quite common for people to try to purchase status symbols or even rent them out under the assumption that they actually own them. So definitely an American thing, and I'm so glad that there's less of that keeping up with the Joneses mentality over here in Australia.
I just can't comprehend that thought pattern or needing to show off or getting into debt for things. Anywho, we have got a part 2 to this video, which is over on Kaitlyn's channel. So I'm going to drop the link for the video in the description. So just click on that and we'll see you in a mosey. See you there, Kaitlyn.
See you, man.